Mr. Grassley.
Yeah, I'm going to put a statement in the record. I wish I had time to read all the examples I have from Iowa employees because their employer are giving them pay raises and increasing their benefits and things like that as a result of the tax bill, so that we know that the working men and women of America are benefiting from it. My first question is to Mr. Cranston. I appreciate your being here to share your perspective on the tax bill. I've heard many similar stories from businesses in Iowa. In talking with small business owners in Iowa, I get the sense that they often grow really close to their employees. Given the investments you're planning to make as a result of the Tax Cuts and Tax and Jobs Act, question, how do you see that benefiting your employees, not just today, but over the long term?
Anytime you invest in your business, you are essentially upgrading. You're creating new opportunities. And as we know, the business world is changing very quickly. And if you don't have the capital to invest, then you're going to get left behind either in new technology or outdated products. So I see it as not only the ability to grow the business, but to simply do the upgrades that are necessary to keep us competitive so that our employees can continue to thrive and be as productive as possible.
Okay. Dr. Holtz-Eakin, an important aspect of tax reform was fixing our broken corporate tax system. As a result of that tax reform, at least one company, Assurant, has announced that it will no longer invert and will remain a U.S. company. Several recent Canadian news articles also highlight how U.S. tax reform will make inversion transactions, such as the 2014 transaction involving Burger King and Tim Horton, and it would make that less likely. One recent article went so far as to say, quote, the U.S. tax reform will end new corporation inversions in Canada. Can you speak, sir, to the importance of reducing corporate rates and a shift to a more competitive international tax system in converting what we consider was a terrible sin by a lot of corporations, which were the inversion transactions?
I think we saw every year, the pressure over the inversion transactions. People characterized it as a sin, but it was indeed these companies simply following the incentives of the tax code. There was no way around it. The New York Stock Exchange, the iconic symbol of American capitalism, is headquartered in the Netherlands because of the tax code, and we needed to change that. Every other country with whom we compete has a territorial system. Every other country with which we compete has a rate somewhere closer to 21%. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I believe, has put the inversion planners out of business, and now we're going to make decisions on an economic basis, and that's much better.
Okay, and also, a significant reform included in this act was capping state and local tax deductions. So would you speak to how this affected the progressivity of the tax code? And then before you answer that, I saw one analysis by the Tax Policy Center that 96% of the additional tax from the SALT limitations is borne by the top 20% of the taxpayers and 57% by the top 1%. Does that sound about right?
It sounds about right. The states that are most affected by this are high-income states. The people who are affected have to be high-income individuals who are itemizing their deductions and taking advantage of this, and it is viewed in narrow isolation, a very progressive reform.
Also to you, Doctor, since the passage of tax reform and all positive news that has followed, many that are against the tax bill have been searching for a talking point that they can use to criticize our historic tax reform efforts. The latest talking point has been that the recent stock buybacks are evidence tax reform was all about corporate fat cats. Of course, what they failed to mention is that millions of middle-class Americans own stock either directly or through 401k or other retirement plans. In fact, according to the Tax Policy Center, 37% of the stock is held by retirement accounts. Moreover, I feel that critics fail to realize that when a company repurchases stock, that money is not stuffed in the mattress. It frees up dollars that can be reinvested. This is, in turn, promotes the type of business expansion and capital investment necessary to help the economy, boost productivity, et cetera, et cetera. So what are your thoughts on the criticism leveled against stock buybacks? Are they necessarily bad for middle-class Americans?
I think the economics of this are very poorly understood. The stock buyback tells you essentially nothing about the impact of the tax reform. That's the first transaction. It's the final transaction that matters. You want those monies ultimately to be invested in valuable, tangible, and intangible capital that raises productivity and real wages. And you can tell nothing about that from a stock buyback. Indeed, there's a good case to be made that you want a firm that doesn't have good investment opportunities to repurchase stock, get the money out of the bad investment opportunities and out into markets where greater opportunities exist. So I think people should put aside the rhetoric around stock buybacks, let the act work, and judge the final results.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.